So word on the street is that a recession is coming pretty soon. And while I don't actually want to talk about it because I don't want people to start panicking like it's going to destroy their lives, but we are going to have to talk about this pretty daggone soon. But here's the problem. Everybody, their mama, and their broke uncle with a million schemes on how to get rich quick is starting to talk about this recession. And some of these people are giving really great advice, but others, not so much. In fact, a lot of the money advice that I've been seeing on TikTok can be pretty laughable. But when the person is charming enough, it can be kind of compelling to start to agree with their warped logic. With that in mind, I've realized that maybe, just maybe, the fact that everyone is coming out of the woodwork with advice on money right now is why I have been getting a particular question lately. How did you become a financial coach? But here's what I'm really hearing when people ask this question. Why should I listen to you over the 50 other people popping up in my stories? So I've decided that it's time for a story time on how and why I became a money coach, so that you can see that I'm not just some random weirdo on the internet that's just making stuff up like some of the people I've seen. Oh, and be sure to grab a notebook because this story time comes with some money lessons that just might help you get through this recession as cool as a cucumber. Hey dreamers, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Tiana B. Clueless, executive pastor, money coach, and co-founder of a multi-million-dollar consulting firm with my husband. I've made it my mission to help Christian women who are trapped in the 9-to-5 life overcome the money worries that are stopping them from stepping full-time into their God-given calling. So if you happen to find that your coins are becoming the ultimate roadblock to you building your business, ministry, or nonprofit on a full-time basis, well, come hang out. I've got some tips, some tricks, and some biblical strategies that will help you make that shift so that you can do what I'm doing, which is what I want. And now that you know who I am and what's going on around here, let's go ahead and jump into the story time. So this particular story time actually starts all the way back in 2009 when your girl graduated from college at Howard University. You see, when I decided to make my trek up to the Mecca, I actually was a finance major because I thought it would look cool before I went to law school. Like, everyone was doing pre-law. I wanted to go to law school, then become a judge, and eventually become a senator, only to discover that I actually hate politics. So yeah, that wasn't gonna work for me, but I didn't discover that until I was already at Howard. So I was going to school for finance and realized that I don't really like stocks and bonds, which is what most finance majors focus on. And I decided to switch over to accounting because apparently I was the top student in the accounting honors program. So when I graduated in 2009 with my accounting degree, not only was I still one of the top students, but I also had a job lined up at Ernst & Young in their fraud group, which, you know, was kind of cool because I wasn't just like those miserable auditors that you hear about. And trust and believe, I did a 6-month stint in the external auditing group, and I understand why those people are miserable because, wow, that job sucks. So I ended up being this 22-year-old chick. Actually, no, when I graduated, I was 21. 21-year-old chick who has this really good paying job. And for the first couple of years, I'm actually doing pretty well when it comes to money. Now, I do have some moments where I was building up a little bit of debt, but it wasn't anything that was too crazy or anything that was just totally unmanageable. It might be oh, you've got $1,000 in credit card debt or something like that. Nothing too major, nothing worth freaking out about. For the first couple of years, it went pretty well, and I did some things that I think were actually pretty smart, and I've even talked about them in a previous video. One of the things that I did was I bought my first car, and I focused more on the purpose and the value of the car than necessarily whether or not it was flashy. Because you see, most of the people working at Ernst & Young were buying these really nice flashy cars. So not only was I driving around in a car that wasn't nearly as flashy as those as my coworkers, but got me from point A to point B and that I frankly had fun driving, by the time I was 24, I also was able to go ahead and buy my first home. And so in buying my first home, I had to make some really smart decisions that I'm gonna be honest, I'm really proud of myself for, but a lot of that came down to me doing tons and tons and tons of research in the very beginning. So as soon as I felt like I was being moved essentially by God to go ahead and buy a house, I did tons of research on mortgages and on just housing and things like that. And I made sure to read every single document that was handed to me by banks and lending people. I was able to actually find a home where it was an inventory home. So basically, they build a house and people kind of tour around that house to decide if they want to build a house in that neighborhood. And they had a deal with a bank. And so because they had a deal with a bank, I was able to actually pay very, very, very little down on the home. So based on my research, based on the process I went through in getting pre-approved, I actually only had to bring like less than $5,000 to the table to buy my first home. And I was able to actually do that with a 401k loan. So there was actually a ton of money left over that I had saved for the house because of all of my research that I then was able to use to furnish the home instead. So if you are in a position where you are about or thinking about buying a house, do a ton of research about the home buying process and about the market in your area before you ever pay anybody any earnest money or even before you get a realtor. Because even though I really liked my realtor at the time, the one who found the house, I am. She's not the one who was able to, work through the deal with the builder and the lender. It was me. So ultimately, I'm the one who really got all of this done. And I might not have been able to do it if I hadn't taken the time to do the research beforehand. But that's not even my official lesson for this section. When I bought my first house, I paid $135,000 for it, right? But I was being told by the bank and I was being encouraged by my realtor to actually, consider spending more. The bank said that I could afford a house that was $180,000. And could I have? Probably. But I wasn't buying a house because I wanted the biggest, flashiest thing on the market. I didn't want to, get cool points or anything like that. I really just wanted to be financially responsible. I wanted to be stable from a home standpoint. And I didn't want to be at the mercy of, my apartment increasing my rent by $100, $200, $300 a year if they wanted to. In fact, the amount of money that I ended up paying on my mortgage, including escrow and insurance and all that other stuff, ended up being only $50 to $100 more than what I would have been paying for rent for a 1-bedroom apartment. And mind you, it was a 3-bedroom house. Here's the thing that I realized with buying my car and buying my house on those first few years when I was making some smart decisions financially, not to let other people talk me into buying things that I can't afford just because they're bigger or flashier or just look cooler. I would have bought a more expensive car that would have taken me a lot longer to pay off if I had been looking at the flash and listening to the advice of others. I would have bought a house that was way more than I needed for a single person with no kids and no prospect of a man, so when no kids coming soon anyway. I would have spent way too much money if I had allowed other people to talk me into buying these extra flashier, bigger things. I focused on what I really needed at the time instead of what looked really cool. It ended up putting me in a really good financial position that helped me once I got to the place where I really did start messing up with my finances. So the decline in my finances really didn't start until after I'd bought my house. There was part of me that wanted to think that it was like, oh, I bought the house and it added all these extra expenses and blah, 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 blah. But once I finally started to look back and think on that time in my life, I realized that it was actually for a very different reason. You see, the reality is that even though I worked this really cool job, because, saying that you work for Ernst & Young and saying that you work for their fraud group, which is one of their smallest and one of their highest paid groups, is actually really cool and a really big honor. But the problem was I was miserable at what I was doing. We did a variety of stuff that on paper sounded really cool. So if a organization, for example, had big major factory that was taken down by a tornado, we would actually help them file the insurance claim. If there was a company that thought there was some sort of embezzlement going on with their company, we would help them investigate the embezzlement claim. When the markets collapsed in subprime mortgage and subprime lending, when that became a thing and the federal government started going back and investigating these different organizations, well, we participated in that by going into banks and looking at, do they know who their customers are, for example? Did they follow the laws around the practices on loan modifications and stuff like that when the housing crisis happened? We would go to all these different places and look at, from a conceptual standpoint, what would be really cool stuff. But it was just kind of just the nature of how the work itself went. In some cases, the people, and in other cases, just in general, the overall culture within that company and within that particular group. And not that particular group all over the country. Really, it was just certain offices. But the overall culture ended up causing me to just fall into this state of misery and depression. I should have known that something was really wrong when I started becoming late to work and didn't care, because I'd always been a very punctual person. But the thing is, because I was miserable, I was spending lots of time going out. I was sitting here buying things that I didn't need to try to make myself feel better. I would go and help other people, and I would do financial things for other people because it made me feel better. It gave me the endorphins. I actually ended up having really, really bad boundaries around money with other people. I would let them guilt me into helping them out because I was so successful. And then other times, it just, oh, I feel great because I get to give, I get to help, right? Because I was in such an emotionally unhealthy state, I found that my spending just really got out of control. So that after I bought my house, I got to this point where I was in roughly $10,000 in credit card debt. I still hadn't yet paid off my car, which I eventually did. And I still hadn't yet paid off my student loans, which I only had like $9,000 in student loans. After I bought the house, I should have been able to knock that out in about a year or two, and I just didn't. It took me too long to do it. And I realized, which is lesson number 2 from my journey, an unhealthy emotional state leads to unhealthy spending habits. That is something that I learned in my real life. It's something that I've seen in clients over the years. And it's one of the things that I realized that once I finally got to a place where I started taking care of myself emotionally, I did learn that it became a lot easier for me to be able to manage my money well. But that's something that I don't learn until later on. So let's kind of move on to the next part of the story. So at the same time that, the first couple of years I'm working at Ernst & Young and things are going well, and then after a while, it just starts going badly for me financially because your girl is emotionally wildin', I found myself in a position where I joined a church, which is the same church that I'm at now, and I ended up being invited to join the finance team because I already had a degree in accounting and a background in finance. It just made absolute sense for me to be added to the team to help manage the finances for the church. I wasn't the person over the team at the time. There was actually someone who was already in the position of finance director. Let me tell you, this woman is a beast. She is super intelligent. And the way that she paid attention to detail, the way that she managed the finances of the church, it was so smooth, it was so straightforward, it was so easy to understand, and she just did it automatically. As I'm watching her manage the finances of the church, as I'm learning it from her, as she's teaching me how to do this, I'm starting to connect the dots and see that same level of discipline and that same level of systemization, if I applied that to my own finances at home, I might not be sitting here with $10,000 in credit card debt, some additional student loans, and, still haven't paid this car off yet. I was looking at what she was doing in managing the finances of this church, and it made me start paying attention not just to my personal finances more, but it made me start to realize that I could take some of the concepts that I was learning on my job at Ernst & Young, looking at other companies, how they manage money, what they do with their money, even the negative things, how people embezzle their money, how organizations lose track and can't even see that people are stealing money from them. I began to realize that I could actually take some of the concepts that I was learning in those spaces and begin to put them together and apply them to my own financial situation. Back then, I actually started creating these budgets and these projections for my spending. So I didn't just have a regular budget. I ended up creating this really, really complicated spreadsheet that not only told me what I was going to expend, but it also told me what my financial position was going to be from this month to next month if I followed along with the plan that I had. The lesson that I learned from watching her and managing the church, I realized that my lesson number 3, look at how companies and wealthy individuals are managing their money, then follow suit when possible. And that goes beyond just how do you manage your money from a budgetary and a projection standpoint. It even applies from, say, an investing standpoint. One of the things that a lot of people have talked about on TikTok that I absolutely agree with is if you pay attention to what these companies and what these wealthy individuals are doing, they're doing it because it's going to lead to long-term financial success for them. If you follow in their example, it's probably going to lead to long-term financial success for you as well. So watch what they're doing, do your research, and if you can, follow suit. My husband and I, we actually went to a mastermind where a person who, is making billions, he was actually talking about how during the last financial crisis and the last housing downturn, he bought 1,000 houses. 1,000. 1,000 houses. But he did that because he realized that because he'd invested in these properties now, he would be able to make a ton of money from them later on. And so what are some of the things that my husband and I are paying attention to? We're paying attention to real estate. When is the housing market going to bottom out? Well, whenever we think that's going to be, that's when we're probably going to snap up an investment property or two. Now, in your case, that might not be what you want to do. You might not be able to snap up an investment property, but maybe the money that you were saving in order to buy a house this year that you maybe decided to pause on because of the way interest rates went up. Well, when the housing market bottoms out, which some people are expecting to happen within the next year or two, this is probably going to be the best time for you to go ahead and buy that family home that you've been saving up for all this time. That's the thing. I realized when I started working in the church that if I just look at what companies are doing, look at what wealthy individuals are doing when it comes to managing money and follow suit, I can probably have some really good success financially. And the truth is, I did. Because as I worked that plan that I created with that really complicated sheet and those projections, I started paying things off. I paid off my student loans and I managed to get my credit card debt. I think I got it down to maybe like $1,000 before the next major change happened in my life, which that was my marriage. Hey guys, Editing Tiana here. And as I was watching the rough cut of this video from my dope editor, Dennis, I realized something. You know, the first half of my story is literally like 15 minutes long. And the second half of my story is like 15 minutes long. So what should you do, Tiana? Let's just turn this into a two-part story time. We're actually going to talk about my marriage in part 2 of the video that's going to drop next week. So if you want to continue to learn the different lessons that I've learned from my story and why the heck I actually know what in the world I'm talking about as a financial coach, then make sure you come back next week for part 2 of this video. But ooh, I'm going to be in trouble. I don't have my wedding ring on. Hold, please. All right. We're blinged out. If you want to get to the point where we start talking about my marriage and the money lessons that I learned from my marriage that I've been able to use to help Christian women entrepreneurs bust through the financial barriers that are stopping them from stepping full-time into their God-given calling, well, trust and believe, there's plenty more to talk about, so make sure you come back for part 2. It is definitely time for us to head out, but before you go, make sure that you let YouTube know that you found this video useful by hitting the thumbs up button and subscribing to my channel by clicking the big red button somewhere down there. Be sure to hit the bell so that you're notified each week that I drop a brand new video with money tips and biblical strategies that are going to help you bust through those financial barriers so that you can step big, bad, boldly into your God-given calling full-time, just like I have. So with that, I'm going to get back to work and, record the intro for part 2, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.